welcome everyone. Tonight is going to be tough because it's the last two lectures, and also we're going to cover two exceptionally important canons. So one is the Korean Goryeo canon, another is a Taisho canon, Japanese Taisho canon. So why these two are tough? Simply because they're beyond my range. So mostly I'm a scholar of Chinese Buddhism, but however I think Korea and Japan, including Vietnam, their Buddhist history is very important, right? So for us doing research on Buddhism in East Asia, right? If you do Buddhism in China, Japan, Korean, or any place in East Asia, you got to know somehow the history, the evolution of Buddhism in all different cultural regions, right, in the greater East Asia. So today is going to be tough, but as I said, I want to turn this into a learning opportunity, right, for both of us, right, for audience and also for teacher. So I hope through these lectures, we all learn in Korea and also in Japan. There are also great canonical traditions. And the link between these traditions and the Chinese traditions actually is very, very strong, very, very strong. So for this lecture, lecture number 7, where I set up a couple of objectives, right, we're going to achieve in this lecture. Right. First, I want to introduce the Goryeo canon. Basically, there are 2 editions, right? Maybe we can call 3, right? Somebody indeed called 3 editions because in between there's a supplementary one. Right? But however, in addition to introducing some basic knowledge about the Goryeo canon, so we're going to situate the Korean canon in the Goryeo dynasty religious culture. Right? It's more than that. Right? We want to put the canon back into the community and the society. When we introduce that kind of cultural context, you will learn that at that time, Goryeo actually was situated in a very difficult kind of a geopolitical situation because at that time, that's the interaction between Song China, Song dynasty. Right? We cover the Kaibao canon that happened during the Song dynasty. And the Goryeo dynasty began almost around the same time. But however, in the north is the Liao or Khitan state or empire, right? Rose up as one of a regional power. Right? At one occasion, invaded Korea. Right? Later, the Mongols. Right? So when they rise up to power, they also invaded Korea. And these 2 canons, 2 editions of Goryeo canon, actually are closely connected to the invasions. Then we will discuss the function of the canon. Right? So one of the hypotheses we have is that because of the military invasion from the Khitans and the Mongols, and the canon, including the blogs, actually serve as a gigantic talisman. Right? So this sounds to be kind of unbelievable. Right? We all know how talisman function, but we didn't see such a huge talisman such as Buddhist canon. I mean the blogs really are powerful for the Goryeo people at the time. So then we try to think about this idea that the formation of a Buddhist culture, including printing, carving, Buddhist canon, can serve for the purpose of nation protection. So I want to give you some basic knowledge about the Goryeo canon first. Right? So that these are dry, hard evidence. Right? Let's go through that first. Then we will supply some details. So we know the creation of Kaibao is a great event in East Asian history. So right after Kaibao was created, right, immediately Kaibao was sent to other countries as gifts, as diplomatic gifts to increase the Song dynasty's international prestige. I think Song dynasty, Song rulers achieved that successfully. And the Korean kings also sent envoys to China and request the canon. So the arrival of the Kaibao edition actually exerted a great impact on the Koreans, right? Including Buddhism, because there are numerous texts arrived, and also the Koreans want to imitate this great prestige, right? Also use that to enhance their own prestige. Right? Based on this edition, the Goryeo edition or the Korean edition, right, is nowadays typically in Korean known as Tripitaka Koreana, right? Was printed between 1011, right, or between 1011 and 1029. Right? So around this time period, it was initiated by this king called Hyojung. Right? Hyojung. So according to the standard version, that's the 1011 year. Right? That's the year it was started. Later, I will tell you there are some disputes or controversy about this year. There's alternative hypothesis about that. And also the purpose for creating this canon, right, according to the standard version, it is for the purpose of resisting the Khitan invasion. I mentioned this invasion earlier. So this edition, however, was destroyed with the Mongol invasion in 1232. 1232. So almost 200 years later, when the Mongols invaded North China and later conquered the entire China, and they also sent troops to Korea. Right? So actually, it's not one single invasion. The Mongols invaded at least, I think, 7 or 9 times. Right? Each time, it's devastating. Right? It's devastating for Korean people. Right? So during Goryung's reign, right? So this king, right? A new edition was created in 1251, right? During the invasion. Right? The Korean people did not want to surrender. Right? So carving the canon becomes a way to resist the Mongol invasion. Right? So this is somehow some basic knowledge we learn. Right? Okay, so then we look at some kind of elements of printing about this canon. Right? So this is a picture I took from a copy from the Goryeo canon. So actually, as I said, the first edition was burned down. So what we have actually are the blocks from the second edition, because the blocks are still exist. Right? So nowadays, they are preserved in Haeinsa in Korea, South Korea. So during history, there are numerous prints actually come out from those blocks. Right? So I visited Harvard Engine Library. They have a lot of such kind of prints. Right? So I took photo of one of them. Then you have one piece of paper here. Right? By the way, if you look closely first, you probably try to identify what kind of a binding format of it is. Right? If you look closely, this is not a scroll binding. Right? So this is something probably we need to pay attention to, because we know during the Kaibao, the time when Kaibao canon was created, all the canon, they are scrolls, right? But this one was not. Right? As I mentioned last time, in the later time, the scroll binding style, because the popularity of the folding style, they have been changed. Right? So the copy I have appear to be, they have been folded. Right? They have been folded. But originally, actually, the papers, actually, sheets of paper actually are pasted together and form a scroll. Right? So then you see here the folding marks here, right? And because this edition, the Korean edition, largely follow the format of the Kaibao edition. The Kaibao is a model for them. And then we have similar format, the 14 characters, 1 column, and 23, right? 23, right? All the way here. And at the end, then you have the title here, right? The 1,000 characters here, and all the basic information about time. Of course, when they carve the new blocks, this has to be changed to the Goryeo dynasty, right? Goryeo kingdom. The printing agency follow the decree of the Goryeo king. So these side, they have changed.
How many characters for each line?
So I counted as 14.
14.
14 characters. So maybe at least the last one, this is 14.
So 6 lines for a block.
This is probably not the beginning, right? There's something, I guess, because the numerous prints have been produced, right?
Mhm.
So it's up to the donor. They want to fold it in different kind of format. Then you probably can.
Seven lines for a block.
Yeah.
7, 6.
7, 6.
Yeah, six. That's
Six.
understandable. No,
First one,
the
6,
first
and
one, the second one,
7.
7.
Yeah.
The first one is 6.
Yeah.
Right. Because this is the end.
Yeah,
Notice
yeah,
this
yeah.
is the end.
Yeah,
of,
that
copy,
one.
Right. So this is not a typical page. It's not a typical page. Okay. So because we have introduced the basic printing knowledge last time, so we're not going to focus too much on that. But we're interested in knowing that how the Westerner first discovered this Canon. Right? So we know this is a great Canon because all the blocks, right, without damage, handed down to us. Right? So we have that, all the blocks, right? So then this is a great miracle. So if I am right, actually the Westerner who first noticed this Canon is this guy called George Clayton Falk. Anybody heard about this person? Right? Probably not, right? So largely he wrote a diary, right, about his travel in Korea. Later he went to Japan actually. But that diary I think somehow buried at, not buried, but just sent to University of California at the Berkeley Library. Right? Stayed there for a long time and only published probably a couple of years ago. Right? So we don't know the existence of this catalog, travelogue for a long time. But however, after its publication, right, if we look at his travel, he actually went to Heisan. At that time, it's a place to store all the blogs, right? So then he left a record, right? This is coming from the 1884, right? 1884. So let's look at this record, see what kind of a setting actually he first, when he first arrived in the temple. Right? Behind the main building was a high hall, on top of which were 2 long buildings, each 250 feet parallel and apart, say, 100 feet. The eaves aligned with brass bells, which rang quite loudly in the wind. In these buildings, well arranged in suitable racks by divisions, are an enormous number of broad engravings, the printing blocks for printing the whole Buddhist classics. Right? So he realized that's the printing blocks. Right? So this is probably Monk already told him. Right? So the blocks, right, are about 28 inches long and 10 wide. Corners bound with iron. So one of the reasons why these blocks kind of came down to us without too much damage, or after printing so many copies still there, probably because the Koreans, they're very, very much, they know how to protect the blocks, right? So they put the iron. So if you nowadays you examine the block, they put iron on both ends, kind of hold the block together, the wood together. Right? And very black, right? Very black because the ink, right? With characters to fill 2 pages, generally being cut on each side of the board. So it's double-sided. So the priests do not know how many words they are. Right? Looks like the monks there, they probably, after so many years, they don't know much about it. By an estimate of the number of racks and the board in each, I calculated 77,080. So this is somehow his number. But however, of course, it's closer. It's close to 80,000. That's the number nowadays we claim, right? Which for sure, I'm quite sure, there must be 80,000. Right? So he frankly admit that. This library is the most wonderful feature of the temple. The boards are beautifully cut, and the wood required to make them all must have been amazing. Right? So this is so far I can identify the earliest record. The Westerner came and discovered this. Right? However, he did nothing to preserve or research. He was not interested in the canon at that time. Right? If I'm correct, he later went to Japan and married a Japanese woman and actually taught at a Japanese university called the Toshisha University. Right? Toshisha University. So nowadays, I said I have been to Japan. During the summer in Japan, the summer TV drama, the hottest TV drama is called Yae no Sakura. And her Yae, she was the founder of Toshisha, together with her husband. Right? So probably they were somehow at the same time. I went to Toshisha, but I haven't been able to find anything more about this gentleman. Right? So maybe he has something more in Toshisha archive. Right? So that's something else, not related to today's topic. But however, I want to show you some other photos I took from Harvard Indian Library, right? So they preserve some old photos of Heiinsa. As I said, this is a place actually nowadays you can find the blocks there. Right? So I can show you the modern, newer pictures. There are lots of them online, but because it's coming from the old days, right? So I just show. Maybe it's closer to the first time when Westerner arrived, right? So this is the courtyard. Then you see on the two sides, according to Mr. Falk, there are rooms, right? So long corridors, and inside you can find the storage of all the blocks, right? Wooden racks on that, you can see there are numerous this kind of blocks. So this probably reflects the early kind of a condition of the blocks when they first made available to us. Right? And following this, the Japanese and the Westerners, they all study the canon. Right? Actually, the Japanese arrived quickly because if you know the history, Japanese just exerted their influence there, and eventually kind of occupied Korea entirely and annexed that into the Japanese Empire. So the Japanese scholars, right, because their advantage, right, Ono Genmyo, right, Oya Tokujo, and Ikeuchi Hiroshi, right, for example, I just name a few, they all study the Goryeo canon, right, so produce lots of scholarship. They did the survey, right, try to preserve the canon, right, reprint. So there are a lot of things going on during the colonial period. Right? Then the French, they also did works on this, right? Maurice Courant and Paul Demiville, for example, they all include the Goryeo canon into their study of Chinese Buddhist tradition. Maurice Courant wrote a comprehensive bibliography of Korean books, right? And he included the Goryeo canon as part of the Korean history of the book. And then we must mention Dr. Louis Lancaster, right? So he used to be president here, and Sun Baek Park. Together, they published a comprehensive catalog of the Korean canon. Right? So it's both English. It's English, Chinese, and Sanskrit together. Right? So very handy catalog. Right? A very big book. So these are the monumental studies, right? Still very useful to us, right? For the bibliography and the history, somehow we know pretty sure, right? What's going on. Although there are some discrepancies, different understandings, that's quite normal. It was designated as a World Heritage in 1995, right? So it's a World Heritage. Of course, it's national treasure in Korea. And the digitization project complete 2000. Right? So, I mean, for the blogs, of course, it's a continuing project. Right? Actually, the first edition, right? Although the blogs have all been burned, but I have prints. Right? So nowadays, the prints still exist. Right? There are lots of such kind of prints exist. So digitization projects continue. So when the canon was created, there's a question for us how to understand the reason why the canon has been created. As we know, they have the Kaibao canon, right? So the standard or most common understanding is this is the Korean culture. The Korean culture, Buddhist culture, is that the Buddhism for nation protection. Right? So this is a very kind of a standard interpretation. Right? But however, in this talk, I try to somehow extend that a little bit, right? And ask question how this work actually in the Goryeo Buddhist culture, right? So I use this phrase called "Gibo Yang Jat," right? So that's the meaning of praying for the divine blessing and exorcising the calamities. So actually, if you look closely, it's not that everything for nation protection, but however, it's rooted in the Goryeo court culture, right? To bless themselves and also to get rid of all the dangers, calamities, right? So that's, and there are very subtle kind of ways and the thinking in their mentality why carving the canon can achieve all this. So I hope in this lecture at the end I can establish such kind of understanding. Right? So then let's go over some history, right? Just to supply more details for the canon formation process in Korea. Right? So the canon, right, not the Kaibao canon. This include actually the manuscript canon as well. Arrived in Korean actually as early as the 7th century. Right? So we have a record says in the 7th century, 643, the monk Jajang, right, actually brought back 400 cases, 400 cases from Tang China. Right? So we don't have that anymore. Right? So we don't know if that's a complete canon or part of that. Right? So then in the 10th century, we have a more definite record which tells us that Tripitaka, right? Indeed the Tripitaka arrived in Korea. So then the creation of first the Goryeo canon, right? So once again, I want to once again highlight the importance of Kaibao. Right? So Kaibao arrived, and according to various history, the Song dynasty, they kept their record. Goryeo dynasty, they also kept their record, right? We checked all the records and we found there are frequent such kind of mission, right? Seeking the scripture, getting back Kaibao to the Goryeo dynasty. Right? So I have a couple of names here, so I don't want to kind of go to details. But however, if you look at the last line, right, we can roughly say the copies of Kaibao, it's not blocks. Right? So the Song dynasty will not give away blocks. But however, copies, right, upon request, can be sent to Goryeo court. Right? This about 6 times, right? At least 6 times. So you can estimate at least there are 6 copies of the entire Kaibao canon circulated in Korea. Right? So Koreans definitely will use that. Later I will talk about how they use the Kaibao canon and why they need to create new ones. Right? But however, at this time in the northern China, right? So something happened, right? Greatly influenced the kind of a change history. That's the rise of Kidan. Right? If you look at the Chinese history, the thread always comes from the north. Right? So the Kidan rises, and they fought with Song dynasty, but Song didn't win the war, and the Song and the Goryeo actually want to form an ally and fight against the new Kidan. Right? But Kidan was so powerful. Very soon, they just invaded Goryeo. Right? So Goryeo has to, I would say, not surrender. The game in East Asia is that we have to kind of, you surrender, but however, you have to follow to treat the country, right, like China or Kidan, as somehow your ruler. So then the country, like Korean Goryeo, has to adopt the reign name of their ruler country's reign name. So in this case, they adopt the Liao dynasty. This is changed. Right? In the past time, they adopt the Song dynasty reign name, but then they changed to the Liao dynasty. So this is a requirement. Of course, they pay tribute. Right? Another condition is that If you surrender, then pay tribute every year. So then for any tribute nation, they have the responsibility to follow the emperor, the emperor in this case, to fight with the Song dynasty. So there are different kinds of the conditions. But however, after that, it was a period of peace. But however, what happened for this first one is that, as I said, the Mongol invasion. Right? In 1232, Mongols invaded and conquered the capital city. Then the first Goryeo Canon actually was burned. Right? Was burned. But however, nowadays, all those blocks, I'm talking about blocks. Right? But however, nowadays we actually discovered in various places, museums, and also monasteries in Japan and South Korea, there are actually copies being preserved. Right? So in total, there are about 2,000 such kind of volumes actually came to us. Why I mentioned this, because for a long time we thought this version was burned down, so very few actually come to us. But actually, we have enough. Right? In the future, if we have enough digitization project, probably we can reconstruct what is going on during the first time when the Goryeo Canon was created. Right? So that's very important, because we know this is also a replica copy of the Kaibao Canon. So we know the Kaibao Canon, we have only 12, right? Only 12 volumes. If we have the first edition of Goryeo, which is closest to the Kaibao, right, we might be able to know about the Kaibao Canon. Right? So this is one of the important information. And also at the same time, right, because the Kidan and Goryeo, their relationships somehow was normalized, right? It's no war anymore, so it's a peaceful time. Then the cultural exchange became frequent. So one of the achievements is arrival of Kidan Canon. During my introduction, I introduced to you, there are basically 3 text lineages in the Canon tradition. From the north, that's the Kidan Canon. But however, in the central China, that's the Kaibao tradition. So that shows actually the Kidan tradition. Their canon actually is very different from the Kaibao Canon. Right? This is good for us, because if everybody follow the Kaibao tradition, probably lots of the texts, Buddhist texts will disappear. But however, because the Kidan Canon, they based their own version of manuscript edition. So they actually preserve different kind of a text, somehow different from the Kaibao Canon. Right? So this actually came down to Goryeo. I'm not sure the Song dynasty, they received that, right? Because the Song and the Kidan, they are enemies. There's very kind of a strict book ban, right? The ban of transporting books, at least for the Song dynasty. No books ever transported to the north. Right? I guess the Kidan did the same. So Kidan Canon arrived, right? And during this time, this very often been claimed. Another attempt was initiated by a great Korean monk called Weichong, right? So his name is here, right? He was a royal prince, but kind of converted to Buddhism and became an eminent monk. So he initiated another project to supplement the first edition of the Goryeo Canon. Right? And this monk, Weichong, he is aware that there must be lost, missing text actually exist in China. So he actually traveled to China. He arrived in Hangzhou and stayed in China for a year, studied with Huayan teachers, visited lots of places. Song emperors, of course, received him. And after he left, actually, he continued to keep contact with Song dynasty monks. And of course, when he left, he brought back lots of books, Buddhist scriptures. And his attempt is to put all this into a supplemented canon. In addition to this, because of the advantage he has, the Goryeo at that time has kind of a diplomatic relationship with Kidan. So he also sent a request to Kidan monks, actually to receive the Buddhist manuscripts from Kidan. Right? So they already got the Canon, but however, he had extensive contacts in both Khitan and Song China. So this is his advantage. So the project, right, it definitely initiated, right, but I think nowadays people have doubts if it is complete or not. But eventually, at least we know Wei Cheng has compiled a catalog, right? So this is perhaps his preparation for creating this new canon, right, supplementary canon, right? But however, so here I have some copies, right, from this supplemented canon. There's some copies handed down to us, but however, we're not sure it is from a real canon because we don't have the 1,000 character number here, right? But however, from the colophon, we can identify the place when this project was started, right? And also their dates and the place name. And in this one, you can see the Prajna Paramita. And in the colophon, it says clearly Wei Cheng, right, actually collated this, right, and proofread the document, right, the manuscript here. Right. So it's clearly this is a real event, but we just don't know the details about that. Okay, then we have the second. Right? If you want counts 3, you can say that. But however, the second one is not complete. Right? We know for sure that the second Goryeo edition, right, actually is a success, right? Because we know the blocks handed down to us still there, right? And it's undeniable that it's a complete project. Right? But the Mongol invasions were devastating, as I said, right? At least 6 between 1231 to 1258. Right? So this only suggests the Korean people, they never truly surrendered. Although each time they signed a peace treaty with the Mongols, but very soon the Mongols fell, the Koreans, they were not truly surrendering. Right? But however, this is also the time, during this time, Korean was not really under the rule of a king of a Goryeo. Right? So Goryeo was the king, and his reign is very long. The reign time is probably 40 years, more than 40 years. However, exactly during the 40 years, and actually the real power goes to a military rulership, right, going to the Chui family, right? Chui family. So they, the 4 fathers and sons, for the 4 generations, they control the power. Right? So they were the real rulers actually in Korea. So although they were ruthless against the other officials, literati, control all the state affairs, but however, one thing, right, so they probably did the right, which is to resist the Mongol invasion. So they were really, really strong in their mind to resist the invasion, right, protect the nation. And the measure they did is to move the capital from Kaesong, right, to Kanghwa Island. Right? If you visit South Korea nowadays, you can go to the Kanghwa Island, right? And the canon, the second canon, actually largely was completed in this small island, right? So that's something remarkable, right? Remarkable. So then, Cui Chongqian, right? Cui Chongqian, he is actually one of the leader, right? The kind of founder of this military rulership, right? A legendary figure, right? Ruthless, of course. And if you like to watch Korean drama, right, so lots of them, historical drama, right, so this is how he has been portrayed in popular historical drama, right. So he is kind of a famous, right, but however, bad cop, right, of course, bad cop. So this is the a map of the Kanghwa Island, right, Kanghwa Island. Right. So this is a place, the capital is moved, and we know the Mongols, they are good at riding a horse, right? But when they came to the sea, it's a barrier. Right? So this island, actually, the sea ocean provides the protection. So they kind of be safe for about 40, 60 years. Right? But after the military rule was overthrown, they just surrendered. Right? Truly surrendered because they have to destroy all the defense. Right? So this is condition for their surrender. Right? Never go back to this island. On the island, actually, you can see some traces of the canon, right? So this nowadays, I download this from website, right? I mentioned during the Song China, there's this revolving thing, right? Very popular, money making. Everybody want to push it. And here we have a relic in the Kanwa Island, right? Changdongsa. Then you can actually push. You see this lady is pushing the revolving structure, and within it is supposed to be a Buddhist canon. Right? So this is somehow the connection with the canon nowadays. I've never been there, but if I go there, I probably can find more. Right? Okay, so let's move on. Then the canon was carved, right, and moved to the island. So this is the way. This is absolutely a government project. So a publication bureau, right, was set up in on the Kanwa Island in a monastery, Seowang Monastery. Right, so in this monastery, right? So the officials took in charge of this, right? Took charge in this. Right?
Is that the 80,000 means that 80,000 block?
Blocks, yes.
So the gentleman, U.S. gentleman, Navy officer, mentioned that 80,000. He's looking for this 80,000.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. That's 80. That's what they often been called, right? 80,000 Buddhist canon. That's the same way we say Korean Tripitaka or the Goryeo canon. Right? So they're all the same. So let's move to the next slide. And this second edition actually is a very high quality. Not only the blocks kind of transmitted to us almost perfectly, but also the quality is such a high. And later the Taisho edition. So later we're going to next lecture we're going to introduce the Japanese canon actually based on the Goryeo edition. The reason is because this monk called Sugi, right here, I already used his collation notes to study Kaibao canon, right? Because in his hand he has Kaibao, Hidan, and also the first Goryeo edition. So what he did is actually to compare all three, right? All three. So he produced this collation notes. Of course, he corrected mistakes. He corrected lots of mistakes. So then the Goryeo edition became the most important. Right? But however, one thing is that although it has lots of influence in Japan, but I asked Chinese scholars, but it looks like in history the Goryeo canon didn't have any influence in China. Right? So the later Chinese canon after Kaibao, right? Most people, the compilers, the monks, learned monks and the scholars, they were not aware of the Goryeo canon. The Japanese know that. Right? Japanese know that. Right? So Sugi, he did this work, and the entire complete canon, right? So this is somehow a rough number. Whenever we come to number, there are going to be some mistakes or rounded number, right? So the actual blocks probably amount to 80,000, right? 250, right? If you go there count. And even if you count, there's a question if that's accurate. I know from my study, they're not only wood blocks for the canon, but also they're miscellaneous blocks. So then the question is, are these miscellaneous blocks actually part of the canon or intended to be included in the canon? Right? So we don't know that. Right? We don't know that. So it is very important. Right? So nowadays, if you visit Haeinsa, right, so then you have the largely kind of a similar setting as the early time, right? But however, of course, they have been completely renovated and well preserved. Right? So they have been claimed this is 80,000 kind of a Buddhist canon. Right? As I said before, 80,000 is a very important number for Buddhist canon, right? Because we represent all the Buddhist teaching, all the Buddhist teaching. And then here, the story does not end here because despite all the research or the standard version of what's going on for the two editions, there are actually some kind of a dispute. Here I just want to introduce one about the date when it was carved. I mentioned this 1011. But however, this Japanese scholar Ikeuchi, he actually believed it should be 1021. Right? I actually think this is quite possible because his idea is that 1011, that's the year when the Khitan invaded Goryeo. And that invasion was actually very short, not very long, and looks like there's no enough time for the king to initiate any project. But however, he later found a stele, an inscription from the Hyuhwasa temple. Then the stele says clearly the king actually made a vow to commemorate his parents, not for resisting invasion, and order the workers to carve Prajna Paramita and other Avantamsaka Sutra and all the other Lotus Sutra, other sutras. Right? So it didn't say the king ordered to print the entire Buddhist canon, but his reasoning is that Maha Prajna Paramita actually amounted to 600, right? 600 fascicle volumes, the largest portion in the entire canon. If you're studying to print this, it's very easy actually to go after this, right? To continue to print the entire canon, right? To carve the entire canon. Right? So he has this hypothesis actually the date probably need to be set around 1021, right? 1021. Right? So this is one interesting kind of evidence or argument. And he has some other evidence, like the most popular version actually is based on E. Gilbo, right? So this is one of the literati and the Goryeo, and of course during the military rule, he was the most famous literary person. Lots of royal decrees, inscriptions actually written by him, right? So he wrote a very influential document. It's a prayer to carve the second edition, right? So in 1237. Actually, the reason for carving the first canon, actually, that came from his prayer. So Ikeuchi simply doubted, after 200 years, who knows if this gentleman actually knows what's happened. So meanwhile, as we know more about the Goryeo court culture, is actually, just as I said, is the blessing, right? Blessing for personal welfare, and also expel the disasters. Right? So that kind of culture is very popular. Right? So the first Goryeo canon, according to Ikeuchi's study, right, and we interpret that mostly is for the purpose of blessing, right? People, right, in Korean, right? It's for blessing the royal family, for the parents, right, and also for the prosperity of the country. Okay, so this is a portrait of this great literary figure, right, called E. Gilbo, right? So he wrote a lot beautifully. Right? I read part of his poetry. It's beautifully written, a very learned man, right? And very important if you want to study what's going on during that time. And his year you see here, right? So he's exactly kind of fall into that time period when the canon was created. Right? So we have some further evidence, but I don't think I have a time to elaborate. Right? So this is a colophon from one of the first edition. Right? So I translate that and use that as a way to prove this is probably not solely for the purpose of resisting the Khitan invasion. Right? But I want to bypass this, but introduce this very important topic here. Right? So lots of question goes to this kind of a problem that what happened when the canon was created, right? How people actually use the canon. We know the Goryeo court, right? The king and officials, they're interested in the canon, but exactly how they do that. We found that in the Goryeo court actually is a very interesting culture surrounding reading the scripture and holding a ceremony called the Tripitaka Assembly. Right? So we have lots of references to this kind of assembly. Right? At the same time, we study Song Dynasty culture, for example. We didn't find any signs, actually, the the Canon has been used in this kind of way. Right? So we don't have this in China. So it's very likely it's actually pure Korean invention. Right? Pure Korean invention. So we have a historical record such as the 1031, such kind of assembly has been held in the Huigyong, right? So the hall of Huigyong. So this evidence, there are more evidence shows it is a regular event, Right? So this is one of the reconstruction, right, of the Huigyong hall. Right? So maybe that's possible. The event of Tripitaka assembly that has been held here. And there, for example, we calculated from the Goryeo, and then from 1029 to 1348, there are about 24 times such kind of assembly have been held. Right? And later, it has been held twice a year. Right? And in spring and autumn, usually lasts for 6 to 7 days, and later extended to 10 days. What I'm saying is that is very important. It is regularly held, and the king will be there, and it's a serious event. Right? Of course, what happened is that the canon, right, the Goryeo canon, or maybe the Kaibao canon will be there. Right? People will use the canon there. Otherwise, they won't call the Tripitaka assembly. Okay? So what's going on in the assembly? Right? So I want to kind of go to some details. Right? First, there are ceremonies being held in palace. Right? So this is pretty sure ceremonies, right? Very serious ceremonies will be held in palaces, right? In places in Kaesong, the capital, and also later in Gangwon, right? Because the capital moved to the Gangwon Island. So ritual area will be beautifully decorated, and the statue will be erected, and eminent monks were invited to recite the canon. Right? So after the canon, the entire canon will be recited. Right? And the record shows the king will be there. Right? The king will be there, offering incense and recite the scripture by himself. Right? And the king bow in person, offer incense, circumambulate around the Buddha statue while holding the scripture. Well, we know this because the numerous poems actually written for this ceremony. Right? Itubo, for example, I mentioned him. He wrote lots of poems. Right? Just the title just shows this is for the Tripitaka assembly. Right? So we know. So from the poem, we know what's going on somehow. In the standard history, Goryeo actually, we didn't see much detailed description, but we can reconstruct it from the poetry. Okay, so let's go to some other interesting aspect of the canon, how the canon has been used, right? So I think the question has been raised about this, right? I think the Goryeo, this has to do with the Goryeo culture, right? So somehow it's different from the Song Dynasty culture, right? Because we didn't find the canon has been used in Song China as a talisman, right? However, in Goryeo dynasty, right, we can see clear evidence people take the canon seriously, and people want the blocks. Right? The power came from the block. Right? So I mentioned the military rule, right? Because they are military, right? So what they're thinking is to use effective tools to fight against the Mongol invasion. Right? So this will include everything. So the military strategy. In the ancient time, it's not like we thought just use weapons to fight. There are a lot of other tools you can use. Right? For example, put a talisman right, on the way when the enemy will come. That talisman work, so that will make the enemies suffer. Right? Make enemies suffer. Right? So this idea is pervaded. Right? So then we have a record, right? Actually shows the canon, right, can be used as talisman to subdue enemies. Right? And also, the canon has been used to dispel astral disasters, like star. Right? The ancient Goryeo people, they look at the stars, and there are star patterns. When the star pattern changed, indicated a disaster. So the ancient people, they look at star. The star actually reflects the human world. If something happened in the star, the human being must do something, right? Must do something to reverse the bad luck, right? So it looks like from our evidence the canon has been used for that. And during the time when they identify a star pattern disorder, they're going to order a tributical assembly, right? Hoping that this can reverse their bad luck, right? To change things, right? Later I will give you some evidence. Right? So dispel disaster, right? Use the canon as talismanic object, right? So that becomes somehow prevalent when the second canon. Right? So this is exactly the atmosphere, the culture when the second canon was created. Right? So the canon largely has played such kind of a role, right? Of course, you can say it worked or doesn't work, right? Because the military rule lasts probably 60 years, and indeed they were successful because the Cornwall Island was not invaded, right? Was not kind of destroyed, and the Mongols has been kept away from this island. But however, later time, the Tsui family, they simply been executed, right? So then the Korean has to have to kind of surrender. Right? So we don't know how it worked. But however, this has been closely related to the Tsui family. Right? So the Tsui family, we identify a decree. Here I translate the decree here. What it says here is that Goryeo, right? So the king here actually issued a decree to praise the Tsui family, right? To praise the Tsui family for their effort to carve the canon, right? To carve the canon. So they have been given the title Duke of Jinyang, right? Duke of Jinyang. And in the year of 1231, you see here, let's start from here. The frontier generals failed to defend. That's Mongol invaded. Right? With godlike planning, right? Choi, right? Disputing all oppositions, right? Single-handedly made the decision to escort me in person to move to the new capital Choben according to geomancy. Right? By the way, geomancy also was very popular in Goryeo court. Right? And within a few years, large palaces and missing official buildings were established. Law and policies were restored, and the Goryeo nation was reestablished. Right? So he is praising, right? But however, here, right, the emperor, the king turned to the blocks. Right? So here the blocks has been mentioned. Right? So then the army quelling blocks of the Great Canon, this must be the second edition, transmitted through successive generations, were all burned by the barbarian soldiers. So this is from the first edition. Because our country has been experiencing many changes, there have been no time to renew it. Right? Choi, setting up a separate supervising office. Right? So it looks like this is purely his own effort, right? Although the state is sponsoring this. Right? Donating all his personal property. Right? He was the person who donated, carved almost half of the blocks. Benefit and bless the country and his family, and his accomplishments are not to be forgotten. His song, the Prime Minister Choi Han, continue his family project to rescue me from disasters by carving the blocks of the Great Canon. So my point here is that the military rulers, they were concerned about the canon. So the canon for them is something, right, which will be effective for defending the nation against the Mongol invasion. Right? So I have some more evidence here, right? So one poem, right, or explanation, right, come from the prayer Igilbo, right? So this literary figure, right, great poet, written for one of the tributical assemblies. Right? So here you see what he mentioned. Right? Because disasters arises from the embryos, right, from the beginning, which means we have to admonish ourselves about gradual emergence of danger, such as this, due to minute changes. However, in astrological records, the lack of many successful policies and governance has frequently resulted in the appearance of ominous stars. Okay, you see here, he refers to the star patterns, right? Something in the heaven changed. So then this continue, I translate this. Right? So this is the most interesting because it brings to some knowledge we don't know. Right? I personally don't study stars or astrology, but it occurs to me for the Asian people, the Goryeo people, the star pattern were so important because when they do the Tripitaka ritual, they thought about that. Right? So they link the function of a canon to the change of the star pattern. So the metal star, right, which is Venus, right, suddenly invaded the Grand Forbidden Palace, right, the Daimon. Right. So the wood star, right, Jupiter, again interfered with the simmering perplexer, right, which is Mars. Right. Mars in Asian Korean astronomy is extremely dangerous. Right. You don't want to see Mars, right, coming to the center of the star pattern. So we therefore became so worried and terrified. It is absolutely appropriate to devote ourselves to the most subtle teaching, which is Buddhism, and to rely humbly on the help of Buddha's compassion to dispel the calamities. Here what it says is that only Buddhism can save us. Right? And the way to do that is to hold the Tripitaka assembly, right? Inviting monks to chant the canon. Right? So in this case, I guess, the Goryeo canon, right? So they want that. Right? So the Korean astronomy actually was very developed, right? So this is one of the earliest observatory found in East Asia. Right? Actually, it's earlier than China. So as far as some record says, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but the year is rather very early, right? 636, right? 636. This is very early. So that shows the Koreans. They are eager to learn what's going on in the heaven, right? Because they follow the philosophy that the heaven and earth are in the same kind of harmonious kind of a coexistence. If there's something happening in heaven that reflects on earth, things are not right. For example, rulership change, or dynasty is over, or they're going to be disasters, then the heaven will give a sign. So then if you observe the heaven, things will happen. You can stop, right? Do the right thing. Somehow you can reverse the deadlock of fortune. Right? So the most dangerous one is Mars, as I said. Right? So the most dangerous situation is the Mars stays at the heart constellation. Right? So Asian, Korean astronomy, right? Also the Chinese astronomy regarded the heart constellation resembles the royal imperial family, right? So the center, if I'm correct, represent the emperor, right? And then this star will represent the prince inherent, right? So the next emperor, and this represents his other successors. Right? So then these three actually are very important. If the emperor or court want to look for some danger coming, right, they better safeguard this area. But however, the Mars, right, at some time they were invaded in this star pattern. Right? When the Mars came, the observatory observed this, they will report to the court. Right? Then they do something. Right? Apparently, Tripitaka, right, has been used for this kind of purpose. Right? So this is kind of a simulation, right, actually dated 1216, right, according to some astronomer. This could be the next time when this kind of a pattern, star pattern formation, become true. Right? We don't know what happened. Now, of course, we don't care about that anymore. But if you read the historical record, this is going to be the way the Asian people foresee the future. Right? The future happened because the star pattern changed. Right? Okay, so I want to stop my lecture here, right, simply to pose some questions, which are very basic for us to understand why the Goryeo canon has been created. Right? So if you have time, and for our online students to complete these questions, and this will help you to understand the situation surrounding the creation of the Goryeo canon. Right? And at this point, I just want to conclude the lecture part.